My name is Corinne, and I'm a Gen Z. My dream for the future is that adults will hear and understand the voices of youth and provide space for the change that we all need.
My name is Wardell. I'm a Gen Xer, and my dream for the future is systemic change brought about by Gen Z. So today we're going to have a discussion and ask each other a couple of questions. I just wanted to start, Corinne, by saying I am really excited to talk to you today about everything that's going on, particularly because I am viewing it also through the eyes of my senior in high school, who is a boy named Isaac. And so watching him go through this full social justice movement has been pretty incredible. So I was just wondering if we could start with, how is that playing out in your life, and what do you want to hear from me to your question around the future?
Well, to me, the past months have been something very interesting, because while things seem to be shaking up, not just in the past few months, but in the past few years, I almost see it as other people finally viewing the world how I've been viewing it for my entire life. It's as if the realities of being a woman and being a Black woman are now extending to different groups. And now different groups are being able to see, oh, it wasn't as great as we thought it was this whole time. So I'm grateful that people are now shaking the table and seeing how I've been viewing the world through my eyes for a long time. But it's a little frustrating that it's taken so much for that to happen. I'm excited, though, because to see people so amped up and so focused on change is really inspiring to me. And I've been able to hone in my voice and speak with a lot of people in the past few months to try to make as much change as possible.
Yes, I actually agree. So just a slightly different vantage point, right? But as a Black woman in corporate America, it's been really interesting because lots of people have been talking about diversity and inclusion for a really long time. The discussion has sort of been, well, how do we get there? Or there's not enough qualified people, or all sorts of things. And at Adtalem Global, the company I run there in Chicago, as well as across corporate America, I'm excited because the conversations are different. They are changing. There's a different momentum this time, and corporate leaders are standing up in a way that I have never seen before, particularly across all, racial lines, ethnicity, gender. They are speaking up for change in a way that I haven't seen. So as I think about that, and then just the poise and confidence of your generation, and I see that, like I said, through my children, but also through individuals like you, because I have boys, so I don't get the Black woman side of that. It makes me think that this is a different time, and the question is, are we going to use it for change, or is it going to be squandered, or are things going to get forgotten? And I think one of the really important things, and I'd love to get your perspective from your generation on this, is it has to be all people who want to proactively make change. So we have to take that word race, racism, racist, and say racist is an action. It's not a person. It's not a pejorative term for a person. It is how a person acts in any given situation. And so therefore we have to be anti-racist. This is the first time that anti-racism has really had a part in the dialogue. And I wanted to get your perspective on that from where you sit.
Yeah, so I think that makes a lot of sense. I noticed that the term anti-racist being used a lot more recently. And I'm glad, because in my experience, I've had to explain to people that not to not participate in racism or white supremacy, you have to be actively anti-racist. And I'm glad that people are getting on that page and now understanding that just to not be actively racist does not make you anti-racist, that you have to be actively working towards change and towards dismantling the structures that make life so hard for so many people. And I'm really glad that the conversation is going that way, because I think that change can happen when people realize that as an individual, you can't just idly sit by and expect things to happen, that we each have a role in this and we all have to do our part.
That's right. And I would say, as you know, to your point of what you'd like to see adults really listening to what's happening, I'll tell you about a couple of different things that's happened across my organization and company. So we had always, diversity is in our DNA, and you can look at our numbers, look at our board, all of those things, and know that that's true. But what I'm seeing that's different, which is a progression, is people who just really want to understand and know and get the experience and the challenges and see it in a different way. So if they're not, you know, a Black male, have been stopped by the police, you know, every few days, or they're not a Black woman who has gone through those particular challenges in terms of in the corporate room, they really are listening in a different way and saying, okay, not just listening and saying, that's really bad, we want to make sure we don't do that, but how do we actively work to make a difference and make that not happen? And I would say the second thing to this, you know, words are powerful, right? And this whole semantic piece, this is the first time that we've used the words Black, white, race in the corporate setting. And we have a series of town hall discussions where we're just, you know, reading things where everybody's watching, you know, 13, that kind of thing, to understand all of the perspectives. And we wouldn't have seen that even probably a year ago, despite the fact that obviously this is a long-standing problem.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, like, in the corporate space, do you see ever a line being crossed? Or as a Black woman, I know that a lot of times people tend to lean on Black women to educate or to take on that role. Does it ever take a toll on you, or are you someone who's happy to share information or to educate?
I would say both. So I am expected to be the person who helps people, you know, to understand. And as an example, I've had several, I mean, CEO level folks ask me, why can't I say all lives matter? Why am I not allowed to say that? And why do Black people think that all lives don't matter? And, you know, you can get frustrated by that, or you can sit back and say, okay, here's why this is important. Here's why Black lives matter. And I try to relate it to our company. So we're in medical and healthcare education, as well as financial services education. So I say, the reason we say Black lives matter is because here in the US, Black people have 3.5 years less life expectancy than non-Black people. The reason we say that Black lives matter is because Black infants have a double the mortality rate here in the United States as white infants. So of course it's not that all lives don't matter. It's just that if you have the right message, all lives, all humanity matters, at the wrong time, which is this time, which is why is it that we are not taking care of Black lives in this country, then of course it's the wrong message. And so I try to do that in a way that is not judgmental, because at the end of the day, unless we are able to really look at it and think about this as a system, right? Which is why where I want the future to be is systemic change. What I say to, I have thousands of people work for me or work with me on the team. Obviously, lots of those folks are white people, or people of ethnicities who are now considered white, right? They may be immigrants and had all sorts of challenges. But what I say to them is, just like the Black people who live in the US, there is absolutely no way that anyone could live here in this system and not have perceptions, microaggressions, you know, concepts of a racist structure. And so that's okay for us to embrace and then say, how are we going to change it? I mean, does your generation think about it that way? Because I know when I was your age, it was very much, I grew up in an all Black, community, and it was very much sort of this black and white. You stayed to your own community, and it seems different now. But I don't know if it's in a way that's really productive for young people.
I would say that our generation, Generation Z, has kind of grown up in this light of intersectionality. So a lot of us who might be a woman or a white woman or a gay woman or anything like that, we've kind of been able to look through a lens that includes not just us, but everyone else. So I see a lot of people fighting for struggles that they might not experience themselves, but because you want others to fight for you, you also fight for others. So I think that's one thing that our generation has started to change and shift, is not only seeing things that need to change for you, but to change for everyone else. And we've kind of grown up in a way that this is all we know. I think a lot of older generations see all the change that has happened, but we see this as what just is. So we see more progress and more things that need to happen to get to the world that we want to live in, while I think a lot of older people might just see it as, well, we've come very far, so let's just be grateful for where we are now. Yeah.
I think that's right. Well, two things. I think that's right. The sort of let's be grateful for where we are now. There are lots of Black and brown people who have lived and are living the American dream, and have made it, whether it's as entrepreneurs or in corporate America. So that's one notion, which obviously doesn't bring all of us where we need to be in terms of just equity across communities. But then the second piece is this sort of denial piece in my generation, and maybe the generation before me, which is things were bad then. We didn't live there. We don't have Jim Crow anymore. We don't have segregation. We have and have had affirmative action. So things are, now we have a level playing field, and people who work hard do well, and people who don't. This sort of moment in time, and that's just, as we know, just not accurate as we look at the history. So I think your generation is more open to peeling back those layers of history, which I think is really important. Again, for this has to be systemic change.
Yeah, definitely. I think going back to just my generation in particular, I think we've kind of had to fight against this idea that we are disrespectful or angry or judgmental because we criticize those older than us, those generations that came before us. But I think it's more of just wanting to see our lives and the lives of our friends matter to each other and to those older than us. And it might be hard. I mean, we're all stubborn. I will say Gen Z is hard-headed a lot of the times, and I think generations can be as well, but there has to be a mutual understanding that we've grown up in different times, and that changes our perspective. So I can't expect someone to instantly understand where I'm coming from, just like they can't expect me to instantly understand where they're coming from. So I think having more conversations like this can dismantle that kind of those stereotypes and the feelings that we have towards other generations. Because from my experience, our generation is kind of in it by ourselves and trying to kind of leave other generations in the past, but we have to work together. We're all here. Right. I've noticed that people are like, oh, okay, I'm not going to listen to the boomers. I'm not going to listen to even millennials. So I think we have to get on the same page before anything can really happen.
Yeah, no, that is so true. And I think that my observation is that your generation is just very, very self-aware, which I think is going to be so helpful in terms of moving forward. But when you think about what I'm Gen X, so what Gen Xers or even baby boomers can do to be helpful to your generation and the future that you want to see? I mean, are there things that you'd say, they would just do this? And that could be anything from, spending more time to actually driving. We all know that long lasting change really is about policy, which takes a long time and is, and is time consuming and is frustrating, but it's also about culture and attitudes. Are there any things that you can think of that you just say, well, why don't they do this?
Yeah, I think there can instantly be a lens shift in older generations to realize
Lens shift.
how
Mm-hmm.
quickly the world is changing and that we all have to change with it. And there's also this era of adultism, which is what um, my generation and younger people consider it to be, when older people kind of have this idea that we aren't as educated or we are immature or we don't know what we're talking about because we've only been here for 15 to 20 years. So I think there has to be that recognition that just because we're younger doesn't mean we know less, especially in a world where we now have knowledge at our fingertips. So a lot of times there can be younger people that are more educated. And that's not to say that we don't gain wisdom with years, but on the topics of politics and law and human rights, I think it's safe to say that a young person can be well informed. And I think older people have to recognize that and make space for young people's voices to be heard. Because a lot of times the issues that we're talking about affect us directly and will affect us for the rest of our lives. So just as we don't want men dictating what happens to women's bodies, we don't want exclusively older people dictating what happens to young people now and in the future.
Very well said. I would say two things. I said, first of all, I think that's right. And I think that's the self-aware piece that I was talking about. But I also think for old people, the category I fit in definitely in this conversation, is that we sometimes we're trying to make the distinction between knowledge and information and exposure and experience. And so if you were to look the generation before me, and something will come up and you might say, why does this happen? Or we need to do that. They would say just two words: keep living. Because obviously you get that exposure. I think the challenge for us as multi-generational changers of the system is that we need to be able to instill and help your generation with as you get experience and exposure, you do get different views, but then we also need to make sure that this is not, and then you just fall into, well, this is the way it is and there's nothing that we can do, right? And so there's sort of that balance there. But I like that. I wrote down those words, lens shifting and adultism, because those are things I need to keep in mind when I'm talking to people in Gen Z, except for my son, who thinks he knows everything and doesn't. But other than that, no, he exhibits the same sort of absolute understanding and thirst for knowledge in and around our society, our community, our sort of social construct, which is not something that I remember being very focused on at that age. So to me, that is absolutely phenomenal momentum. One thing I wanted to just ask you about, or actually tell you that I had seen, is your art is phenomenal.
Thank you.
How did you get into art? And my biggest question is, do you have the kind of emotion first and then decide this is what I will depict for this emotion, or does it happen the other way around? Because your art is very emotional and compelling.
Thank you. I think I definitely came into the art world a lot later than most people. I think it just happened for me a year.
Wait a minute now. How old are you?
17. But I think in the way I see it, and when I look around, a lot of people my age who are artists have been doing it their entire lives. And obviously people find hobbies and find interest late, but I only really started taking my art seriously within the past like 2 years. And I think for me, it became an outlet. Like I've always wished I could like write music or dance to at the level that I know a lot of people can, because I feel like that's such a useful expression of what you're feeling, thinking. And I realized that I can do those same things with my art. So a lot of times I think, what do I want to make people feel? What do I want people to understand? So a lot of times my art comes from my head and trying to translate it into a way that other people can understand. Because a lot of times I'm someone who rambles and someone who isn't super clear in my thoughts. So I think art makes it so that um, people can see the world how I see it. So I really enjoy having that outlet because things aren't always easy to say or to even write down. So to just
Right.
a paintbrush or pencil or even digital art, it makes it a lot easier for me.
Yeah, well, I wanted to mention that because I thought I just think it's phenomenal. I hope you keep doing it, even though you got
Thank
to it
you.
at such a late age.
Thank you.
15. Good. So the one thing we haven't talked about a bit is the global health pandemic, right? So we're talking about what I believe is a global social pandemic, but the coronavirus and the pandemic and what that's done for, to interrupt your education and sort of life as usual. How is your generation dealing with that? How can we be, hopeful as we can be? Obviously, everyone's going through the same thing, but how do you think about that?
I think in terms of the coronavirus, it's another example of Gen Z kind of stepping out of ourselves. So instead of being super worried about, oh, my senior year, my prom, my graduation,
Yeah.
a lot of times focused on this is bigger than us. This isn't just my ACT or my SAT. This is the whole world. So I think I'm grateful to be a part of a generation that isn't so focused on the little things in ourselves. And of course, there are people who are, and it's valid to be worried
Yeah.
you're going to miss out on your last teen years or the memories that you've been waiting for all your life. But I think for me, I'm not someone who has put so much stake in high school and in being a teenager. While it's fun, I like being young, but I think I'm excited to see how this shifts the world, because I know that after this pandemic, things will never be the same. And I think a lot of people have also had that lens shift to realize that this is disproportionately affecting certain people, or why did we wait so long to respond, and all the things that happened systemically that led to us being in September now and still the same as things were in March and April. So I think for me and for Gen Z, we are frustrated and angry. And I think that's driving more change and more conversations, because we don't want this to keep happening. We don't want this to happen to younger generations, or see it happening around us. It's really disheartening when we can't leave the house and we can't go see our friends. A lot of us got our driver's licenses this summer and aren't able to actually use them. I think that's something, it's a place of frustration, but we have to shift the conversation back to how it's affecting not just my education, but the whole world and people who I think a lot of what I'm seeing, especially as the school year is starting for public school students, and has already started for a lot of private school students, the idea of accessibility of Wi-Fi and um,
Yes.
laptops, iPads. It's really unfortunate to me that people don't have that access, and it isn't being provided as well as it should be, as well as food and shelter that a lot of people get from school that is just not available anymore. And that's really disheartening for me.
So I think this is one place where our generations are very much aligned. I think that we, for the most part, our generation, in a way that has not happened before, sees the connectedness between the social injustice and the systemic issues, right? So the digital divide that you just mentioned around education, which is one of the things that or the issues that my company, that Adtalem, has been talking about for a long time. All of a sudden, it's in the national stage, which is a good thing. So I think that intersection between the haves and the have-nots and this global pandemic is being recognized. And again, my hope, like yours, is that makes systemic change. And then secondly, that look, the world was not prepared. Our country, the United States, was not prepared in a way that it should have been for this. And we have seen some leadership and some lack of leadership across responses to this that I think will help drive kind of because this won't be the last pandemic, but how do we manage these kind of things and understand that we can build walls, we can do whatever we want. We are part of a global community that, because of not only technology, but air travel and all of those things is just ultimately connected. And so in a way that other pandemics, Ebola in West Africa, as an example, I did a lot of work in West Africa in and around the time of Ebola, where it was considered just sort of a problem over there. Coronavirus has just really helped everybody to understand just how connected we are in a different way. And I think good can come out of that.
And definitely. For you, as someone who
Yes.
is a leader in corporate America, do you see different, you say our generations align a little bit more on this topic, but are you seeing people who are missing that link between the social justice aspect and the medicine and health aspect of this pandemic?
Look, I think there'll always be people who do miss it, right? Who live in a bubble. But I have to tell you, as we talk about the healthcare disparities, first of all, the supply and demand disparities in just nursing and doctors, like we do not have enough of either. I've known that for a really long time because we do medical education, but now people are understanding as they're watching these surges in different parts of the country and hotspots, if you will, that we just don't have the system that we need to have, and we certainly don't have enough diverse physicians and nurses, as an example. There's just no question. So I think people are recognizing that, and they're recognizing that Black and brown people are dying at higher rates from the coronavirus, whether that's pre-existing conditions or not. And let's remember that we will soon be going into, we have a vaccine. Who gets it? How's it distributed? When's it distributed? How much does it cost, right? And so we continue to be faced with the mirror of who we are. And as I said in the beginning, my hope and my excitement about the momentum we have now is I am seeing different conversations and acknowledgement of these disparities, certainly in corporate America, and in many cases on the political scene in a way that has not been apparent before. So I can't say that everyone sees these connections, but certainly the dialogue is changing, and it's changing for the better. People want to understand now versus, the sort of pat answer to all of this that has been given for generations.
And I'd love to know, what is something, if there is something that you, as someone who is a Gen Xer or someone who works closely with healthcare, that you wish young people or people in general would understand, that you kind of are noticing or have been seeing for a long time that people maybe have not caught up to yet?
Yeah, so I think as it relates to just healthcare in general, aside from the pandemic, we just have a dearth of young people, particularly young diverse people, but young people in general, who are going into health professions, particularly physicians, veterinarians, family nurse practitioners, those types of things. And part of it is because I know certainly when I was in high school and college, but even now, part of it is just there's not as much or enough awareness about the need in those professions and the career paths and just how much you can really drive your own personal mission to help others and to help society, which is a big part of the Gen Z sort of DNA, right? Is, well, what am I doing that's bigger? Whether it's helping climate change or awareness of climate change and changing that to, I think healthcare and our system and just how it does not serve on an equitable basis should be one of those things that young people both demand change to, but also look at in terms of, is this a place where I could really do good and have a broader impact on society. So I think that's one. It's not that it's not on any not in any of the conversations, but certainly it's seen as sort of separate and apart from some of the other causes. I mentioned climate change, environment, things like that. And I think it should be, because it's that important to our future. We're going to be living with these disparities for some time.
Yeah, definitely. And do you see, hearing you say like we should look into the healthcare professions and healthcare world in general, do you think there is a lack of education on those topics, or possibly a result of the student debt crisis and people not wanting to take on more than they can handle?
Yeah, so I think it's both. If you take the debt piece first, that obviously is across all of higher ed, and I'm hoping that this pandemic and this sort of focus on then e-learning, but then also, what skills does people really need to have to be able to go out and have a career and make a decent living wage. I think this is going to help change that dialogue. And then secondly, I think the education piece is a part of it, because when people think about, let's just take physician, when people, there's two problems. One is there's just simply not enough seats for people who want to be physicians in this country. And that just needs to change. We need to provide more opportunities for that education. Then once they're in that education or that opportunity is there, folks from communities like where I grew up and where you live, we need to make sure that they understand education is as important a decision as buying a house, or it's not so much it is what the cost is, but it's not so much the cost, it's what's the return on that investment. And what I think your generation, whether it's medical school or even college and university, right? Particularly now as college is Zoom calls, as universities try to figure out what's going on. You ought to demand, what's the return on investment? What am I going to, not that everything is about money, but what am I going to be making when I get out and I have this degree? What are my opportunities? How much optionality do I have? And then what's my career progression, right? And so if you look at, again, back to using the medical school example, we have people who 99.9% of our students pay back their loans. We don't pay back your loans unless you've got a job, making decent money. So what we have to do is separate the dialogue from, it costs a lot, to how do we get it to cost less? How do we make it more equitable from a digital and internet and, sort of resource perspective across all communities? And then how do we make sure that schools are being held accountable for return on investment? And all of those things they're really interrelated to some of the social justice things we talked about before, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important that we get that message of education across, because as time passes, there seems to be this rise in cost, but at the same time, the degree seems to be less of an indicator of success or of intelligence. So I think the first step to that is, just as we were talking before about systemic changes, understanding education, even at the elementary and high school level, making it equitable and accessible for all groups of people and not just the one specific group that's overrepresented and catered to currently.
Right. Right. I think that's right. In fact, I know that's right. And I think education is really at the sort of foundation of a lot of the systemic issues that we have, which is why I choose to be in that particular area. But I also think now is a real opportunity to reevaluate what that looks like and to really make sure that we're not allowing the divide to get greater, right, between, as you said, those who are catered to and those who aren't. Let me ask you this: as you think about kind of going into this school year, what are the greatest challenges, and what would you like to see from leaders? I'll just say corporate leaders because I'm not in politics, so I'll just ask for me, like what would be hopeful for you, for other young Black women, for other young people in general, for you to see us doing as we close out this calendar year and go into 2021?
I think first things first, we have to get into a space where it doesn't seem like a space where young people and older people can coexist and share decision making and share conversations about the issues that matter. And I think a lot of times corporate leaders can kind of fall behind politicians even or education leaders because it seems so far removed from social justice issues or from young people. Yeah. When in reality, a lot of times corporate leaders are making the decisions that will affect young people and affect a lot of people yes. in the world. So I think to recognize that decisions that you make are affecting not just you will then allow space for people to make decisions about themselves and to represent themselves. So I think that before any change can happen, there has to be space for people to use their voice and for it to be actually heard. So a lot of times youth councils or councils with minority, which I'm not really a big fan of that term, but diverse individuals, backgrounds, I think that can help in terms of making decisions that benefit the majority of people and making decisions that will have a net positive for a company or for the world, hopefully.
Well, I appreciate that. And I will tell you that your generation is doing something for corporate leaders that is just phenomenally helpful. And it's not just me. I talk to CEOs across industries. And I need you to continue to do that. And that is really demanding change and pushing for those things that you see as not equitable and that should be changed in the system. Because when you do that, when you question and press brands, when you protest in terms of whether it's police brutality or other issues that affect your generation, it gives us and allows us the space to be able to say we have to make change. We have to have, and it has to be at scale, right? We can't. My generation, if you think about as a Black woman, it was really the generation of a few people got to be successful, and because they worked hard. Now it's because we got opportunities that just were not at scale for whole communities, which is one of the reasons why I went to Adtalem, because I got to go to a great college because someone happened to find me, and there were a couple of Black people there. We need that for 100,000 people, minorities, as you say. I don't like that term either, but diverse community members, so that we can make an impact. And so the more that you put these issues at the forefront, the more that you are selfless, the way that you said, in terms of not necessarily worrying about your graduation or your prom, although I pray that we get to the place where you get to do that this year. Same with my son. He just started his senior year. But the more that you put the greater whole as larger than yourself, I think the I won't say easier, but the more we're going to be able to drive for systemic change. And what I will tell you is my generation does want change in the system. And I think that that is, I won't say it's new, but I think it's much more broad today in terms of awareness and understanding than it was even a year or 2 years ago. And so that gives me hope for our collective multi-generational world.
I think that hope is very powerful right now, and that a lot of people are holding on to and should hold on to hope in terms of what comes next and what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I know who to come to if I need a Gen Z opinion, which a lot of times I do, or even to get some ammunition when I'm talking to my boys. So good. And your school is going to be online?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Starting next
Okay.
week. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good.